And good evening, everybody. Friday night, May 23rd, 2024. Welcome to Settle the Scores. Glad to have everybody on tonight. It's been an eventful week, to say the least, a very interesting week with regard to the Colorado Rockies. Feel like that's becoming a running theme in recent weeks. But as y'all maybe know, the winning streak was snapped last week, actually right after the last episode, and it was a little bit hard to come by another W after that one. So we're going to get into that a little bit. As the title says, and it's really my main reaction is, will the real Colorado Rockies please stand up? Because it's hard to tell from one day to the next. Are they the team that we saw last week leading into the series against San Francisco? Are they the team that blew the lead last week on last Friday to San Francisco and then proceeded to lose every game until yesterday? We don't really have a good sense of what this team is. Obviously, a lot of people, including myself, didn't expect that it was going to be a lot of the team that we saw leading into last episode, but this also doesn't seem to jive with the level of talent that does exist, at least on the offensive and defensive side of the ball for this club. So my guess is it's somewhere in between, but this has just been such a Jekyll-and-Hyde last 2 weeks for the Colorado Rockies, and we're going to get into a little bit. And actually, there was some interesting things that I was reading and hearing being hypothesized and kind of kicked around a little bit from an analytical standpoint from some of the great people over at Fangraphs. Highly recommend checking them out if you haven't already. But I'm going to be referencing that a little bit as we go throughout the show, because they put up some pretty interesting takes and ideas that hadn't really occurred to me that I actually found quite intriguing. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but we're going to start with a little recap, a little sort of reviewing over what's gone on over the past 5 or 6 days. Everything that I'm going to be referencing does include last Friday's game, because again, obviously it hadn't gone final since I was last on the show. So everything that I reference, if I say for the past week regarding numbers or anything like that, that includes last Friday's game up through yesterday's game, just for to make that clear. So starting it off, just kind of looking back at what we've seen the last few days, the last 5 or so games. Brian McMahon definitely has been the star of the show these past few days. He's gotten 7 hits, 3 of them being home runs. He's walked twice as much as he struck out. His strikeout rate has been remarkably low, even for a 5-game sample size. And of course, to walk twice as much as you're striking out is just showing incredible eye at the plate. But to include or to sort of supplement that eye at the plate, slugging almost 800 again in any sample size, that's just absolutely elite is really the only way to put it. He's still getting, for those who appreciate the batting average and the consistency that seems to reflect for some people that he's been hitting over 300 during that time frame. So there's really not much he isn't doing, and he's adding that with a positive defensive run save metric in the field. So he's really quite literally doing it all the past 5 or so games, and that's been really nice to see, because obviously for the most part, any substantial success or any sort of remotely sustained success that ever exists and develops for the Colorado Rockies is likely to have him as a key critical part in that. So that's what we've gotten from him so far from an individual standpoint since the last time we were on. Ezequiel Tovar, he's kind of been he's kind of been split. It kind of just depends on what you're looking for from an offensive player, because he's really slugging the heck out of the ball, but he hasn't taken a walk in these past 5 games. He's gotten 2 balls to leave the yard, and he has been averaging slightly above average, registering slightly above average offensive production. But again, not really getting walks, not hitting for a super high average. A lot of that has been slanted a little bit positively for his power numbers. And again, as usual with him, we're getting some really nice defensive play as well. But going beyond that is when it really starts to get a little less optimistic, a little less positive. Brendan Rodgers didn't really have much to speak of offensively the past few days. Brenton Doyle struck out almost 40% of the time. Jordan Beck, he's still not really giving the results consistently that we were hoping for with him coming up. Obviously, he's a rookie and he's in his first few games, and he went up against some good pitching. So it's not obviously any sort of a red flag long term for me at this point that he struggled to this point. But then again, it is what it is. We've not really seen a lot of what we were hoping for from him. He's got another home run. He's got another stolen base, but in between these massive moments, it's kind of like, it's kind of like you're dealing with sun showers, and you'll see 2 moments that make you go, wow. And then in between, it's like nothing really to speak of for the longest time. It's like, I hate to make this comparison because that's nothing against him personally, but kind of reminds me of how we talk a little bit about Zach Wilson. Is so far you've gotten, some really eye-popping moments, but it's in between, it's been a lot of nothing. How you doing, Mr. Osborne? Says, hey there, Scoops and all. Mr. Osborne, how you doing, sir? Hope you had a good week, and looking forward to being in touch soon. Kurt Valenti says, Scoops, what's up, pal? Give me your biggest AL and NL surprise and biggest disappointment. And he says, thank you. His next couple messages, congrats on law school. Yeah, I don't want to get into this too long because obviously it's not this show's not about me, but I did get an acceptance into law school today. So thank you very much, Kurt. That's really appreciated. And he said, now you're going to be in SEC country. Kenny says, what's up, Scoops? Working tonight over here. My question for you, could and do you think one of the Rockies' young starters can develop into a true ace of the staff? All right, so I'm going to start with this, and then I'm going to get back to Kurt's real quick, just because this is more Rockies specific at the moment. So in terms of the Rockies' young starters, again, I spoke highly of, now he has not performed well since we last talked about him, but I've spoken highly of Feltner, and I still do have a high opinion of him. Again, obviously he hasn't shown a ton the past few days, but you can't really, for the most part, make too much of a snap judgment on small sample size. That's where I differ from the sort of Steinbrenner mentality. Feltner is probably the one that I would still say. I know that people are high on Chase Dollander, but he's again, I'm not comfortable making that type of a declaration on him without having seen a little bit more from him at a higher level. Feltner, he has not put up great ERA. He's not put up a great whip, but he doesn't give up a lot of hard contact. He keeps his walks down. He gets he keeps the ball on the ground, which I think is helpful for the Rockies at Coors Field, especially if their defense can continue to improve. So I like some of what I see there that stands out to me from him, and I think that he's a little bit older than someone you'd want to see who's still got stuff to work on at the age of 27. But I think in terms of where he's at right now, I could see him really being somebody that develops into something more special. But I'll admit, and I've not spoken particularly favorably on him in the past, Austin Gomber is really impressing me in recent times. Also somebody who's getting some ground balls, also somebody who's not giving up a ton of walks. His extension has been very solid, and what he's able to do with his off speed stuff, which of course, if you're going to be successful with your the ability to pitch deep into games, you got to have that stuff to play. You got to have your stuff playing off one another, and his ability to get his off speed and his breaking stuff, but more specifically his off speed to play off of what's not the greatest fastball, it's kind of an average fastball. The fact that he's able to do that, his changeup is really impressive. And if he can continue, again, somebody who's a little bit older, he's 30 years old, but if he can continue to incorporate his changeup in a particularly effective way, and of course, like I said, that four seamer has to be something that he's able to get. It's about average right now. I'd like to see it get a little bit better, but if he's able to do those two things, and then he does have a breaking option where he goes to either the knuckle curve or the slider. So if he can kind of get a little bit more bite on that four seamer, then I think you could get a couple of really solid years of this guy in the front of your rotation. Going back to Kurt's question real quick, or questions, I should say. Give me your biggest surprise, AL, NL, and your biggest disappointment. I'm going to assume you mean teams, so I'm going to go off of that. If you mean players, just correct me, and I'll be happy to jump into that as well. Team, for a while, I would have said Houston, but they're starting to look a little bit more like the Houston we expected to see, so I'm not going to go with that. Also, because I've spoken so much about them recently, I think that's kind of low-hanging fruit. My biggest disappointment, I'm tempted to say the Angels, but because they lost Ohtani, their expectations for them were a little bit more measured. Honestly, I would probably go with Toronto in the American League. This is a team, I don't understand how you have Bichette, how you have had, you've had guys like Robbie Ray, you've had Vladito, you've had all these guys who individually are supposed to be very high caliber players. They've got, there's another player that they have up there whose name is escaping me right now. But this is a great example of a team that has so much individual talent, but can't get it to coalesce with anything. And I don't know if that's a managerial issue. I don't know if that's a coaching issue. I don't know if that's we've heard some of these things about some of these players personality wise. Maybe they're having sort of a San Diego-esque type of problem where those things are not coalescing. But you cannot afford to just be a collection of talent that can't play together in a division that's got the Baltimore Orioles, which are going nowhere fast, meaning they're not going to be, going into irrelevance anytime soon. Tampa Bay always punches above their weight level. The Yankees, are currently sitting, 18 games over 500. And the Boston Red Sox, as much as I think that they're terribly run right now, they are not going to ever be, a team that just kind of is completely irrelevant in the American League East, even on their down years. So Toronto, it might be my pick in the American League. National League, in terms of a disappointment, I hate to say it, but I got to go with the Mets. It's every year going back to Steve Cohen taking over. Every year I have expectations for this team because they have the money, they've got the talent level, even after losing Verlander and Scherzer and DeGrom, even after losing these guys, they were touted for some of the young talent they had coming up. They had Mauricio, they had Vientos, they had Beatty. Obviously they've got the polar bear up there still. And even when they were letting go of some of these guys, they had other pieces that I liked both offensively and in the rotation, particularly pitching wise. And then Diaz got, he fell off a cliff so badly that they removed him from the closer role. So it feels like anything that can go wrong for the Mets does. And it's remarkably frustrating because this is a team. And again, I liked their hiring former Boone right-hand man, Carlos Mendoza. So when you're looking at a team that has that level of expectations every year, and especially now with Steve Cohen up there, I think you're going to see him go ham this offseason in free agency. But at some point, I don't care if you're going ham in free agency, trades, wherever it is. At some point, you can't just be winning headlines. You got to be winning baseball games. And and again, I love Steve Cohen. I have a lot of respect for him. And I think that he's going to be a great owner for baseball. But so far, it's been a lot more bark than bite. Keith says, don't pick on my poor Angels. Yeah, that was probably even more low-hanging fruit than Houston at this point, to be honest. Kenny says, yeah, Scoops, you and I are sharing a brain tonight. Blue Jays for me. Yeah, that's kind of the one team that's really jumping out for me right now. And then, to talk about the positive side of things, because I had a question was also about teams surprising me. Cleveland is probably the biggest surprise to me in the American League. For one, they changed managers and going from perhaps the best manager of this generation from Tito Francona to Stephen Vogt, who was expected to be a future manager for a lot of the latter part of his career. But to do it this soon with him as a first-time manager with no coaching experience and a lot of players on that roster who people weren't quite sure what to expect, either whether they were going to still be there or their injuries or one thing or another. So the fact that they're 16 over 500 is astonishing to me, and to me, immense credit to guys like Vogt and some of the leadership over there. I may not love the way the front office runs sometimes, but similar to Oakland, at least before these last couple of years, similar to Oakland, they had a solid track record of getting more out of their results than people expected. And then NL real quick. I would say Milwaukee's probably my surprise there. Most of the other teams that are doing well, I expected to. But also, I mean, how do you trade your ace this offseason and you're still, leading your division by multiple games and, still well within contention of being a top seed in the NL? I mean, I know it's only late May, but anybody who's able to trade their ace and have the issues that they were with, Atanasio, of whom I'm not a fan, and still be able to not only hang on, but look like they're projected to win, upwards of, high 80s games. Definitely somebody who's surprising, and I got to tip my hat to. Mr. Ronquillo says, good evening, Scoop. Good evening, Mr. Ronquillo. I hope you've had a great couple days, and I appreciate you and always tuning on. What's up, my friend? Keith Brugman says, give me some hope for the Rockies this year. What you got? How you doing, Keith? Thanks again for, all your help and for the question. So I did just mention a little bit about Gomber. He's definitely somebody who I would say is someone to, if you want to say dream on or kind of have some optimism on. He's definitely somebody up there. But and I know I've brought this up before, but I want to really hammer this point. When they bring up Drew Romo eventually, whether it's, someone like me, this is a mentality that people like, Brian Cashman and others have touted in baseball. Now, again, whatever you think of, specific people that I say, I'm just using them as references. You can go to any number of individuals if you prefer to look elsewhere. But a big way to both, you have to do both run production and run prevention. And a solid way on top of pitching, especially when your pitching is struggling to do the run prevention thing, is building up the middle. You got to get your catcher right. You got to get your shortstop right. You got to get your center fielder right. And you got to get your second baseman right. Obviously, ideally, you get every position right. But those are the four you really got to get right. And I think that they have the right people in each of those positions, or at least have the right people on the doorstep for each of those positions. Big Drew Romo fan. I've said repeatedly how I'm a Tovar and Brenton Doyle fan. Brenton Doyle is my favorite player on the Rockies. Brendan Rodgers is not quite what I was hoping he would be, but he's definitely, better than a good number of people at his position. So once you get all four of those guys on the roster, and once they start gelling, you put in a couple more pitchers who are able to, competently pitch at Coors Field and who actually put the fear of God into some of these lineups. All of a sudden, you're talking about a much more take notice of us Rockies team than we've seen in recent times. So that would be probably my go-to there is I really like the way that they've been doing the building up the middle thing, because I think most teams that you see that are doing well in this day and age typically have done well with that, again, which translates into both run prevention and run production. And similarly, on the contrary, a lot of the teams that have struggled to do those things tend to be on the lower end of some of those spectra as well. Not seeing any additional at this time. I'm going to jump back into a little bit. I started to reference earlier about some research that had been done recently that I got to dive into a little bit this past week. I'm going to be referencing a research that was done by Fangraphs. Credit to Michael Rosen, was kind of the head guy behind this. It is called "What If the Rockies Only Threw Knuckleballs?" So basically, the evaluation that was done in the wake of Padres pitcher Matt Waldron pitching at Coors Field. He threw the first knuckleball that was pitched at Coors Field in 16 years. So for reference, that was in 2008, and 2008 was the first time I ever went to a baseball game. So it's a good amount of time. Padres catcher Kyle Higashioka had been having issues tracking the ball all night, but Waldron went 6 innings pitched and only allowed 1 run, which was among his best performances as a pitcher in professional baseball to date. So due to being 5,200 feet above sea level, knuckleballers have historically avoided pitching in Colorado due to quote, conventional wisdom dictating that knuckleballs at altitude are a bad idea. And people who have thrown the knuckleball and done so pretty successfully and at a high level in Major League Baseball in recent years, such as R.A. Dickey, are among people who have corroborated this theory. Every pitch moves less at Coors Field. There's less drag. There's less air resistance on the ball. So the analysis was that nasty pitches lose a bit of their bite at Coors Field. And one theory that that the optimal Rockies pitcher would want to limit their spin-reduced movement on their pitches. And then there was an example brought up by pitching analyst Lance Brzezowski, referencing, again, a guy that I've talked about quite a bit, Ryan Feltner, whose pitches all hover around the 0 inches of movement mark, both horizontally and vertically. And he basically said that this is the kind of pitcher that the Rockies should look to roll out in every spot of their rotation. Velocity, small pitch shape, and average command. Rosen, who did the analysis, kind of countered that a little bit and said that knuckleballers are a place that they should really start to dive into a little bit more. Due to that pitch type having the least total spin among any pitch type that can be thrown. Some analysts were pitching back on this, but Waldron himself, the pitcher who was responsible for this for the Padres, firsthand accounted that he perceived his knuckleball as being the least affected by the altitude. So I'll be curious, kind of doing a little more. I'm going to do a little more on this going forward because, again, this just came out today, so I haven't had a ton of time to delve much more into this, but I want to go a little bit further into this. Look and see if there are guys down either in the minors or guys who are going to become available in the next draft or in the next international free agency period. Guys who may be worthwhile to kind of throw some money at, test those theories, and see if maybe there can be a little bit of a niche that the Rockies could break into if this is perceived to be able to hold water. So. That's kind of everything there. I'm not going to read the whole article. Y'all can go read it if you desire. It's in the messages here, and I will put it up on the social media posts for this show when we're done. If anybody wants to go take a look at it as well. It was really well done. It's a lot longer than I said, but again, I didn't want to just sit here reading an article for an hour. Kenny says, would love your thoughts on this, Scoops. Which catcher do you think is better for the Rockies pitchers? Elias Diaz, who is one of the best hitting catchers in the league, Jacob Stallings, who in my opinion is better defensive catcher and better pitch caller. So in a vacuum, I prefer the better defensive catcher, better pitch caller, better pitch framer. There are 3 positions that I've often said, and again, it's not just me. This is not my theory. This is a theory that's been tested and a theory that's been, well documented and substantiated. That the positions that affect the defense most are catcher, shortstop, center field. So at those 3 positions, I am more than willing to sacrifice a little bit of offensive production to put a better defensive player there. I'm willing to sacrifice, like, for example, Kenny, you and I are both Yankees fans. We watched Gary Sanchez for the longest time, who even when he could hit worth a darn, was abysmal behind the plate for much of the latter part of his Yankees career. And I was so excited when they traded him to Minnesota and we put Jose Trevino back there. Trevino was definitely a step back as a hitter, but how much better of a pitch framer, how much better of a defensive player. And it shows, again, it goes back to that whole, if you're not producing runs, you got to be preventing runs. And I'm very comfortable sacrificing a little bit of run production at those positions to really take a boost at run prevention, particularly at those 3 positions. So I would definitely rather have the better pitch caller, better defensive catcher. But one thing I would add there is pitch framer, because you're in this day and age, at least until robot umps are, become more ubiquitous. Pardon me. At least until they become more ubiquitous, which as of today, Rob Manfred said he does not believe that will be online for the 2025 season. So it looks like we've got, for better or worse, at least another full season after this year of the status quo. So at least until those come online, I will continue I think we'll continue to see a heavy weight put on pitch framing ability, which is obviously just the ability of a catcher to kind of steal a strike, if you want to call it that. David Bird says, watching from Cedar Hill, Texas. Mr. Burns, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you had a great week. Really grateful that you're able to always make almost every show. Always appreciate seeing you on it and having your engagement. Keith says, I love to watch a knuckleballer with his stuff on point. Same here. It's probably my favorite pitch to watch, other than, and again, if I might even put an asterisk on this, because obviously the ephus isn't really a pitch. So next to the ephus, the knuckleball I will watch like sort of compilations of different players' knuckleballs, and I'm just like, I think back of like, as fans, we sit here and we analyze, and we're like, oh, how did he miss that, or how did he why did he swing at that, or one thing or another. And then I start to watch these from a player POV, and I'm like, how does anybody hit a baseball ever? Which makes sense as to why people like Deion Sanders have said that hitting a baseball is the hardest thing to do in sports, which, from at least what I know, I would agree with. He says, thank you so much. Absolutely, sir. And Kenny says, once again, I agree. Follow-up question. Would you look to move Diaz, because I believe he has solid value in a trade? I definitely think that that's something you look at. I think that might be something that you look at since they have Stallings as well, and I believe both are in their contract years, if I remember correctly. You're kind of looking, I think it's going to kind of partially depend on where they're at with Drew Romo and what they're comfortable with. I don't know if they're going to be comfortable, if they're going to bring him up and kind of throw him right into a starting catching position. I don't know if they're going to bring him up and kind of, DH him a little bit. I don't know if they're going to bring him up and kind of platoon him. I don't know what their plan is with him in his development once he eventually breaks in, and when they expect him to break in. So I think that's going to be heavily impacting on it as well. I would be more comfortable moving him because, again, as I just said, Stallings kind of has a bit of a profile that I think I would lean a little bit heavier on as a catcher. So I would definitely be interested in moving into moving Diaz. Again, I'm not going to take 70 cents on the dollar for him. I'm going to have to, I want to make a deal because it's the right deal to make. I'm not going to just move, a guy because, oh, this is the best offer I have right now, so I'm going to take this offer. Like, no, I still have an expectation of what I'm going to get for somebody who has the ability that he has. But yeah, he's definitely somebody that I'd be putting on the trading block later into the season, particularly if I feel like Romo is imminently going to be replacing Stallings. Again, like I said, even if you're not seeing Romo until 2025 or projecting Romo until 2025, I'm still comfortable rolling the rest of the season with Stallings and then having Romo take the reins beginning of next season. That appearing to be the final at this point. So I'm going to go back and just kind of talk a little bit more about the sort of recap that we started on with regard to these last few games. Pardon. Because again, I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that we saw such a significant shift and just a significant drop off from where things were last week. And again, we talked on the show a little bit last week, and it was clear that a lot of what we were seeing wasn't sustainable. But not being sustainable and absolutely just falling off Mount Kilimanjaro are two different things, and not the one that I projected or the one that I expected has manifested. I guess expecting the unexpected in sports and with this team. But look at just kind of breaking down a little bit from the team compared to the rest of the National League. They are kind of middle of the pack in terms of drawing their walks, and they're supplementing that by not striking out a lot, which is good to see. But again, their offense and their home run production has not really been their major concern. Their defense has definitely not been a concern. It's probably been my favorite thing about them this year has been their defense. Their pitching continues to be just it's I feel like a broken record saying this, but their pitching was bottom 2 in the National League this past week, particularly their bullpen. Their bullpen is combining bottom 2 in terms of, so the second most walks allowed and second most home runs allowed in terms of average per 9 innings. And it, again, obviously just a ratio that you can't maintain when you're only sort of middle of the pack in terms of striking guys out. We're seeing guys who are giving up way too much in terms of guys with their averages of expected to get on base in, Kinley, Lambert, Mears, Bird, all of guys, are just giving it up at way too much of a clip. The only guys who really were somewhat under control the last few days with that were Gomber, as I mentioned, Vodnik, who I know we've spoken about, and then Cal Quantrill has had a bit of a nice few games going here as well. But the three guys who concern me the most, unfortunately, Feltner in the past few days, but Mears and Block they're averaging. So I talked a few weeks ago about those sort of thresholds for what contact you want to, get as a hitter, and of course, and obviously conversely want to avoid giving up as a pitcher. And in that threshold, Mears, Block, and Feltner, those three have been averaging being in that threshold. So it's not even that's been their worst. That's been their mean. That's been their sort of median the past week, and it's just not something that they can have success with if that's going to continue. Pardon me. Quantrill has been, obviously, like I said, he's been a pleasant sort of upward trajectory. But if you've got those three guys continuing to be as bad as they've been, then it's going to really be an albatross to your pitching staff. Nobody on average or on offense has really been, within that range from a run production standpoint. But Jake Cave has had a little bit of an uptick in his offensive production in the last few days. But some of what I'm seeing from him in terms of the contact that he's making and some of the still things that he's struggling with outside of that, I question really how much we'll be able to rely on him long term. Mr. Burns says, I almost forgot. Happy belated birthday to Bobby Cox. When Bobby was leading the Braves were the best baseball team ever. Baseball ain't the same since he left. Yes, happy belated birthday to Bobby Cox. The Braves actually are technically the quote-unquote, if you want to call it the quote-unquote home team for the school that I just got into today. So I'm actually, my aunt and I were just talking about getting a Braves hat to celebrate, just kind of, talking about fun stuff there. So yes, definitely in the spirit of the Atlanta Braves and all of that as well. An additional wish of happy belated birthday to Bobby Cox, one of the true great managers, not just of his generation, but of all time. Obviously up there in that conversation with guys like Joe Torre and Tony La Russa, at least the Tony La Russa from St. Louis. Obviously, he was a different story in Chicago that I think even especially Chicago fans want to forget. Keith says, losing some close games, do you think the Rockies should try to manufacture more runs with the players that get on base? I think you should. I mean, I don't mean for this to sound kind of like a cop-out type answer, but I think you should just kind of play into the ability to get runs, whatever you're built to do. So if you're not built to hit home runs, or if you're built to do it, but you're not able to do it, then yeah, you got to start finding other ways to do it. You got to start, taking your walks. You got to start, getting deep into counts and, wearing guys down like this. We talked about Moneyball last week. The quote from Moneyball is, I want you guys taking at bats off the 10th and 11th pitcher by the end of the series. We got to start. We want to see more of that. If you're not able to get these home runs, then yeah, whether you win 8-5 or you win 1-0, it counts the same at the end of the season. It counts the same in October. It counts the same on the standing sheet. Not that nobody cares, but in the grand scheme of things, it matters very little whether you're winning 8-5 or you're winning 1-0. So if you're not getting the ball to fly out of the yard, then yeah, go up and take a walk if you have the ability to do so. Something of that nature. Guys getting on base, it's again going back to the same thing. The quote is, he gets on base a lot. Do I care if it's a walk or a hit? Which is one of the reasons why I heavily lean more toward OBP than batting average, because that's very true. If he's on first base, I don't care how he got there. I don't care if he leaned into the pitch, for crying out loud. So yeah, I definitely think that run manufacturing, if that's a way that they're able to kind of do things if the ball isn't flying out of the yard, or if they're away. So obviously they've got a little bit of a, I don't want to say a disadvantage, but less of an advantage. Take a walk, lay a bunt, steal some bases, get some runs. Again, there's like, I think there's myriad different ways that you can look at it in terms of what that looks like. And again, it, kind of playing to the strengths of different players. So I'm not going to say that I have a clear idea right now, because obviously it depends who you're facing and all this other stuff. But yeah, I mean, you're able to win even in this day and age where there's a lot of emphasis placed on launch angle and exit velocity, and for good reasons, because we've got a lot of increasingly certifiable and verifiable data sets that substantiate why that's the case. But if you're not getting that ball up in the if you're not getting that ball up in the air, if you're not getting that ball to fly out of the yard, that doesn't mean you can't win baseball games. It just means you got to get creative and you got to do it other ways. Like I said, get your guy on to first base. Pardon me, sorry. And just figure it out the other way. Kenny says, Scoops, I have to run my friend. Great show tonight. Fun question for my last one. Oh my gosh. If you were playing center field for the Rockies and leading off, what would your walk-up song be? Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Well, first off, if I were playing center field for the Rockies, they would have a lot of concern because of the fact that if anyone's ever seen me either run or try to deal with thin air. But in all seriousness, no. I've said for a while that my go-to walk-up song would probably be by the Rolling Stones, Start Me Up. That's a big pump-up song that I use when I go to work out. Absolutely love that song. It fires me up. Another one that I've really come on to recently is Hardy, the musician Hardy. He's got songs like Sold Out or Screen. Those are a couple songs that I could really see using as well. So those are probably the first three that come to my mind. And actually that was a really fun question. So thank you. Clayton says, hey guys, smash that like button and share. Mr. Heron, thank you so much. I feel like I say it every week, but it's just because it continues to be, deserving that, you're constantly on here for a lot of different shows and, completely just super active. And all of us greatly appreciate that. Kenny, have a nice evening and a great Memorial Day weekend. I know that you guys have some fun stuff planned I know it's a huge thing down in New Jersey. So have a great time and looking forward to hearing about it. I see you walking up to Dancing Queen. No, LOL. I don't dislike ABBA by any stretch of the imagination, but that if I were asked for the first 100 songs that came to my mind, that would not have been on there. I'm definitely going to go. I mean, my top two musicians are Bruce Springsteen and Morgan Wallen. Yes, I know it's a surprise to people to not hear Taylor Swift on that list, but no, my top two are definitely Bruce Springsteen and Morgan Wallen. So if it were past the songs that I mentioned, it would probably be coming off of those two. Give me AC/DC Thunderstruck all day. Okay, so I do like AC/DC. Admittedly, I can't remember how that song goes. Oh, another band that I had forgotten, Nickelback. I'm on a big Nickelback kick recently. Great way to top off a Thursday night. DB4L, baby, Bo Nix, baby, let's go. Mr. Heron, I am so fired up for y'all on the Bo Nix front. I think, again, I've said before, I think y'all got the right guy. I think he went to the right place. And I can't wait to watch him this year in Denver. I think he's going to be a solid, pickup for y'all. And I think you're going to start to see some better production going forward. Mr. Burns says, question, what is your thoughts on MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred automated ball strike system? So I wasn't a fan of it, and I'm still not thrilled about it. Again, I was an umpire myself for a little bit, and I know, either people who've been refs or umpires, and I do agree with the people who, even though I'm a big analytics guy, I do agree with the people who say, it's a human game, human element is part of it and whatnot. And I agree with that to an extent. But when I see stuff, the two events that I saw recently, the one with Aaron Boone and the one with Aaron Judge, those two events that I saw recently, and they weren't the tipping points for it, but because it had been leading up for a while, but the amount of just absurdity that's been building up, and just those two things just being great microcosms of it, I'm increasingly becoming somebody who could become sympathetic to the idea. Mr. Heron says, Luke Bryan, baby. Mr. Heron, that was actually my first country music concert, July 31st, 2014, just a few days shy of my 14th birthday. We went to a Luke Bryan concert out in my, not my hometown, but not too far from here. And that was quite a show. I was a huge Luke Bryan fan back in the day. Not as much now, but definitely back in the day, I very much was. We've got Yep. Keith, I got you, man. Thank you very much. And so while we're kind of at a bit of a having gotten caught up on all the comments, just want to get our weekly shout out to Ms. Pearl and to Morgan Trinkets. Want to tell you all a little bit about Morgan Trinkets. For over 33 years of experience, they are your headquarters for Southwest pottery and jewelry, as well as estate gold at wholesale prices. Started in 1990, once a nationwide company. Now they do shows exclusively in northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. All their gold is real gold, 10, 14, or 18 karat gold, and all their silver is sterling silver. How do you find Morgan Trinkets? On Facebook by searching Morgan Trinkets today. If you catch Morgan Trinkets at one of their shows, they take all major credit cards, and on Facebook they take PayPal, and all orders are shipped free over $50. Check out Morgan Trinkets. That's Morgan Trinkets on Facebook today, and the link is being dropped on the different channels below as well for those who are watching on Facebook and or YouTube. Getting back, Mr. Heron says 8 years in a row seeing him on tour plus farm tour. Oh, that must be a lot of fun. Yeah, the country concerts I've been to. That was one of them, and I've also seen Garth Brooks, Morgan Wallen, and the Dixie Chicks after they renamed to the Chicks. Darius Rucker as well. I know I forgot one, but that's really awesome. I look forward to hearing how the next one goes. Your thoughts on Cole Swindell? He's got a couple songs that I really like for sure. Mr. Burns just brought up Jelly Roll. Yeah, Jelly Roll is one of my absolute favorites right now as well. I Need a Favor in particular is fantastic song. I listen to it almost every day. Pulling on to going back to a little bit of what I was discussing prior. That was pretty much everything regarding the recap from these past few days. But looking forward now, there's obviously a new series that's starting going into the weekend, and we've got it's not starting today, it's starting tomorrow. We've got a home series against the Philadelphia Phillies. Phillies are a team that's been playing pretty solid. Obviously, they are not the reigning NL champs, but they were the NL champs previously. And following up that series, we're going to be staying at home, and they're going to be playing the Guardians, who I just talked about. And obviously, they've been at the top of the AL Central as well. So a couple of the slate of 6 games that I think are going to be quite competitive for the team. And obviously that's always how you get better is going up against those types of guys. You got Ty Black tomorrow facing Christopher Sanchez. Christopher Sanchez has 47 strikeouts and an ERA of about 3.3. Aaron Nola, who's got an ERA of just over 3, is the following day, and Ranger Suarez, who may be the breakout player of the whole National League this year, 9-0 with an ERA under 1.4, will round out the series on Sunday, facing Cal Quantrill. So Sunday in particular, I think is going to be a really solid pitching matchup to watch between those two, between Suarez and Quantrill. So I'm looking forward to seeing that game. And then the probables are not out yet in terms of the series versus, the series versus Cleveland. Keith referenced the loss to the A's. Yeah, that was, I don't know. The A's have been a team that has surprised me a little bit at times, but again, they're still not a very good team. They are the type, they've been scrappy. They've gotten some scrappy wins at times, including against, New York and Colorado. But again, like you said, they're still a team that people, I think, look at their schedule and just expect to beat most of the time. So, and also looking at Dakota Hudson real quick as somebody who's starting in the next couple games that I mentioned. Another example of somebody who, who I think is a little bit of an example why I've referenced in the past that I'm not the biggest fan, at least in this day and age, of referencing the win-loss statistic for pitchers. He's got a 1-7 record as a pitcher in terms of his individual win-loss record. In those losses, he's got one game where he allowed 2 earned runs, another 2 earned runs, another 3 earned runs, and one no earned runs at all. So in more than half of those losses, he's allowed 3 or fewer earned runs. So the fact that you're going up, the fact that people are looking at this statistic as such a be-all, end-all, or at least such a heavy weight when it comes to pitchers in this day and age, I think just does a massive disservice to some pitchers. Now, again, he's struggled in several games this year. That is not to delegitimize that fact, but also looking at the fact that you've got the Jacob deGrom effect, where you've got guys who are just not getting run support or are getting one of those games he had allowed 3 runs, but they were all unearned. So that's something else that you got to factor in as well. And that's why I use things like fielding independent ERA or FIP, because if you're going into this, this day and age, and you're looking at a guy and saying, "Oh, he's 1-7," so he must be having a terrible year. Now he's not having a very good year, but it really decontextualizes those numbers to just purely look at that, and that's one reason why you've heard me before, and you'll probably hear me again a good number of times say that I'm not the biggest fan of that. Again, not to take away from the 20 game winners of history, or the guys like Cy Young and Roger Clemens and whatnot, but it gets harder to put as much stock into that when a lot of relief pitchers are pitching more innings than they're used to, or the sort of different dynamics of what's weighted heavily versus not has kind of shifted a little bit. Mr. Ronquillo says Aaron Judge and the Giancarlo Stanton both hit solo home runs today in the win against the Seattle Mariners 5-0. I didn't actually know that. Thank you, Mr. Ronquillo. I appreciate you telling me that. Aaron Judge has been really making people who did not believe in him when he struggled to start the season, really making them look silly. And Giancarlo Stanton, if I still hear Yankees fans telling me that they want to get rid of Giancarlo Stanton, I just don't know what to say at this point. Because he has been, because it's almost the Venn diagram of people who say that they should get rid of Giancarlo Stanton, and also the guys who say if you don't do it in October, what you do doesn't matter, is almost an overlap. Meanwhile, Giancarlo Stanton has been one of the most reliable producers in October since he came over in 2017. So, I'm definitely a Stanton defender, and I'm really glad to see him do that. And obviously, Aaron Judge continues to be Aaron Judge. At this point, they need to just give Juan Soto a blank check. I know because he's a Boras client, he won't sign until after the season. But if he wants $600 million and a stake in the stake in ownership, for all I care, do it. How good can Judge be in Colorado? That is that's one thing that I keep thinking about, is like doing either another home run derby or all-star game or whatnot. The problem that happens is that some of these guys who are the archetype or the size or whatnot of these different players tend to sometimes shy away from that, because their swing mechanics really get kind of screwed up sometimes when you're going in just to perform that way. Because again, the way you approach a home run derby is not the same way you approach a regulation game, if you want to say. But man, to watch those two being in a final two at either the home run derby or in a big spot in an all-star game that's being played in Coors Field, that's salivation worthy as a baseball fan. And who knows if hopefully one day, at least as an opponent, hopefully we'll be able to see that happen out in Coors Field, because that would be just, I feel like you would probably see, there was a home run recently that was estimated to be like 520 feet at some level. I feel like you could see that being surpassed by getting that type of a competition together. Keith, that's something that I've thought about a couple of times, but now I'm going to be thinking later, like, man, I really wish that they would be able to get that type of even an exhibition arrangement going. Pulling back on that, I'm just going to look at what's going on a little bit around the division throughout the NL West. Obviously, we just saw the series against the Giants. It's really, obviously, the Dodgers are kind of way ahead of the pack, 14 over 500, even though that's I still think a little bit less than people expected at this period of time. But right in the middle, or right beyond that, sort of that middle of the pack, the Padres, Diamondbacks, and Giants are all within one game of one another for that sort of second spot in the division. Obviously, the Rockies are several games behind them, but you get one of those teams going on a cold streak, and the Rockies, doing, another thing like they were just doing this past week. I don't think that, again, I'm not saying that I think the Rockies are going to surprise for a wild card or anything like that, but I think that they could be in position to at least play some sort of spoiler at some point if a couple things go their way. I still think they're going to end up being one of the worst teams in the National League, but I don't think that they're going to be a team that I think that they have a chance to not be a team that is just unwatchable by August too. Like, I know that some people or some teams just become unwatchable by the end of August. I mean, heck, New York was that last year. But I think Colorado, if a few things go their way, especially if Drew Romo comes up and some of these guys up the middle continue to produce the way that they have, I think that you could have a team that's at least compelling to follow and compelling to watch their games, even if they're not exactly playing for an October spot. Pardon me. And then kind of looking around at the wild card a little bit, I know we talked a little bit about that before with the sort of the questions about disappointment versus surprise. But there's really not a ton of teams that I would look at and say, oh, they're definitely out at this point. Aside from the Nationals and the Marlins, again, this is assuming that we believe that about Colorado. Other than the Nationals and Marlins, it really still feels like anybody else is at least in some sort of contention for a spot in the playoffs. I think that obviously the Reds and the Pirates would need a lot to go right, but I think that about a month or about 2 months into the season right now, I think we're still looking at what's going to be a pretty interesting push going into the summer, and that's going to make the deadline pretty fascinating, especially because right now, all teams except for the Marlins and Rockies are within 5.5 games of a wild card spot. So that being said, if you've got that many teams now, again, nobody can predict what's going to happen over the next 2 months. But if you get to a point in late July where you've still got 10, 11, 12 teams within a stone's throw of a wild card spot, that may be a precursor to a relatively inactive deadline because teams are going to be more reluctant to sell if they're saying, hey, we're only a few games out. If we just get XYZ, we can be the team that makes a run here like Arizona did or like Philadelphia did. So I'll be curious to see if there's a bit of any sort of a correlation between teams that don't make a move at the deadline and teams that are kind of still within that sort of general, it's possible for them to make it, but they're at the very far back end of that. Because, and then on the flip side, you've already got teams like Miami who have pretty much already thrown in the towel for the season, 51 games in, which I have already gone on a rail about how terrible I think that is. But, that's their decision to make or their mistake to make, not mine. So I think that, and then, the American League is a little bit similar. The White Sox are really the only team that is mathematically really, quote unquote, out. Obviously, Oakland and Anaheim are hanging on really by a thread. But yeah, I would say the similar on that side as well is when it comes to the deadline, if things stay as sort of teams stepping all over each other and, these sort of everybody's within, only a couple games of the team ahead and behind them, we might be in for a pretty inactive trade deadline if teams are not looking to move off of pieces. Because even if you look at the teams that are likely to be in a seller's position or the position where they would sell, the White Sox, no disrespect, who wants anybody that's on the White Sox right now? Them being 20 under 500 is because there's very little on that team that's desirable. Tommy Pham has been performing, relatively decent offensively, but our team's going to want to take on a 36-year-old, outfielder who, has at times had some questions about his, fit in certain cultures or like clubhouse cultures. And then, beyond that, Paul DeJong is, a league average offensive producer who's striking out 35% of the time. So just kind of doing a little bit of a cursory look. That's going to make, I think, as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline, it's going to make things more curious for the teams that are sellers. Like, again, the White Sox and the Marlins, and presumably Colorado will end up some level in that discussion. Jess Andrews says, just a quick hello, my friend. Happy to catch you again this week. Jess, thank you so much. I hope you're doing well. And please give my best to Kurt and your entire family. Pardon me, sorry. But yeah, I don't know. I know it's a little early to be talking about the trade deadline in some respects, but I think as that starts to take shape, a lot of teams, especially with now the fact that the date keeps getting moved around, it's a little bit later this year. A couple years ago, it was very late. I think that was the year that COVID, and the league player association discord, all of that was occurring. But as they shift around with the date that the deadline is being held, the number of teams, obviously there's more teams now that are making the playoffs, so that's adding a factor as well. I think I'm not sure if this is going to be a year where we see one of those trade deadlines that is, like a few years ago where it felt like every team had at least one star who was either being added or subtracted, or at least every relevant team had at least one star that was being added or subtracted. Pardon. Coming off of that, a couple of other things that I did want to mention real quick. Oh, we just talked about the White Sox. They lost Eloy Jimenez, so that was another part of that continues to go wrong for them. A ton of things are going wrong for them this season. I didn't put them as a disappointment team, even though they are horrendously bad right now, just because I didn't have the highest expectations for them. But man, you'd be hard pressed to find many teams that more has gone wrong for in the first couple months of a season recently than has been the case for them. I think also looking, we talked a little bit earlier about the loss to Oakland because that had not gone final when I last checked the statistics. Just to get a little bit more clarity on that, that was a 10-9 loss in 11 innings. Actually, 4 runs scored by Colorado in the top of the 11th, only to have 5 runs scored by Oakland in the bottom of the 11th to walk it off. Don't see that every day. So that's of the 19 runs scored in that game, 9 of them were in the final inning. And then just in terms of a few production-related highlights, we had 2 RBI from Brenton Doyle, 2 from Brendan Rodgers. Ryan Feltner had a very good start, 6 innings, 4 hits allowed, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts, no earned runs. But again, another example of just the bullpen couldn't do anything. Vodnik, Kinley, Beeks, Koch, and Lembert all were tagged for at least 1 earned run. And Lawrence, even though he wasn't tagged for any earned runs, still gave up 3 base runners in just over 1 inning. So just another disaster from the Colorado bullpen. What else is new? But there definitely are, I think, some elements that are things to hang your hat on. And, talking about the question earlier that I think came from Keith, just some things that you can kind of use if you're looking for something to wet your beak with this team. It can definitely be, built, that sort of foundational, especially as we see what's going on with eventually when I keep saying Tony Romo, when Drew Romo gets eventually up to the major leagues, which I'm hoping to see that relatively soon, just because I'm really excited to see what he's able to accomplish. So far, he's been really solid this year offensively at the AAA level, hitting 370 and OPS well over 900. The one thing he hasn't really been doing is taking walks, and he really hasn't stolen that many bases this year. He's stolen 2 bases. But yeah, it's the only thing that he really hasn't done in his profile this season is taking that many walks. But again, when your OBP is almost 400, you're slugging almost 600. I'm going to look past a little bit of that when you're giving me that sort of production. So I don't know, depending on how aggressive they're willing to be with him, because he already had 4 games to his name at AAA last year. Depending on what they're willing to do with that in terms of how aggressive they're willing to be with him, which my guess is that it probably will be later in the season, maybe as a September 1st call-up if they do anything, because they've given him about 100 games at each of the previous 2 levels in the minors, so I don't see this would be that much different. But at the end of the season, once those either at September 1st call-up or maybe once at least once the PCL season ends, he is somebody who I could see them trying to get some time at the major league level at the end of the season. And if so, I really look forward to seeing that because I think he's going to have a lot to offer the Rockies at both sides, both as an offensive producer and as a defensive player. Although I don't think he's going to maintain the level of power that we've seen so far. The PCL, Pacific Coast League at AAA, for those who aren't as familiar with it, is kind of notorious for being a league that inflates offensive production, particularly power numbers. So I don't know that I would expect that to be something that really maintains. Just as an example, his slugging numbers at the two levels prior were 440 and 372. 440 is still very respectable, but it does kind of go to show that you went from somebody who was, high 300s and low to mid 400s to now almost 600. I do think that that's a little bit based on the league in which he's playing. And that kind of does tie into as well. When you hear me use numbers like weighted on base percentage or weighted runs created plus, WRC plus, when you hear me use numbers like that, it is partially for that reason, because those numbers take into account the environment in which you're playing, your defense, the stadium park factors, as they call them, which is, how it's favored more towards offensive production or defensive production by how it's structured and whatnot. So that is just for some context, that is one reason why I do use some metrics such as that, because it tries to cut as much as you can to what the player's actually doing and what he's able to control and what he's doing and the results he's getting based on the things that he can actually control, rather than things that are, based on more heavily on, the defense behind him or the size of the stadium he's playing in. Because obviously, as people know, places like Yankee Stadium or Coors Field are more known for home runs than are T-Mobile Park or whatever the Mariner Stadium is now, and Oracle Park where the Giants play. So just adding a little bit of context there as well. Michael Ronquillo says the Yankees starting pitcher Luis Gil has been the best Yankee starter with 6 wins and 1 loss. When Garrett Cole returns from injury, would you take Luis Gil out of the starting lineup or keep him there? That's a really great question. And I've had this sort of back and forth in my head as well. Because for a while now, again, Luis Gil's biggest, I don't know if I would say flaw, but the biggest question that people had about him was his command and his he gives up too many walks, particularly for a starting pitcher that you'd like to see. And that was rearing its head again earlier this season. But, I mean, at some point, you can't argue with the production. You can't argue with results. And when you're able to do that, especially for a team with these expectations going up against the teams that they've been facing, at some point, do you consider either going to a 6-man rotation or bumping somebody else out? Do you move a Clark Schmidt to the bullpen? Do you move a I'm trying to think, because I'm definitely not moving Stroman. I'm definitely not moving Rodon. My only other thought would really be Clark Schmidt. So those would probably be the two things I would evaluate, are either going to a 6-man rotation or more likely moving somebody else like a Clark Schmidt to the bullpen. I can't justify moving Luis Gil out of the rotation when he's kicking, that to that extent. Because we're not just talking about a great pitcher, doing well for the Yankees. We're talking about being one of the best pitchers in the American League right now, and doing so seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, he was always a guy that people liked and they loved his stuff in the Yankees system. But a lot of people, for valid reason, had concerns about his control and his command. But I mean, it gets to a point where, you've got, as I always say, I say it with, when I go on my analytics rants, I mean, numbers don't lie. Mr. Osborne says, great show, Scoops, lots of good info, not on just the Rockies, but on baseball as a whole. Thank you so much, Mr. Osborne. I really appreciate the kind words. And going up just a little bit past the buzzer. So thank you all for hanging in these last couple minutes. Thank you all, everybody who was on the show tonight, whether you were listening, watching, commenting, or any combination of the above. Thank you again to Keith for helping me out behind the scenes. Been a lot of fun tonight, and I do encourage y'all to tune in on Sunday night. We've got another episode of What's the Scoop, supported by both the K&K Sports Show, and of course, I've gotten a lot of support here from my friends over at RMSN as well. And next week, back Thursday, again, the new time being Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Mountain, to once again settle the scores with our Colorado Rockies. Good night, y'all.